After a series of conditions and continued suspense late into Friday night as to whether the Iranians would take part at all in the ceasefire talks with the Americans in Islamabad, the Iranian delegation has touched down in Pakistan, received by Pakistan's Army Chief and Field Marshal Asim Munir. The Americans are expected there in a short while from now as well. The American delegation is, of course, led by US Vice President JD Vance. Now, will these talks lead to a durable agreement, a durable peace, or is it merely both sides buying time, providing some respite to a war that has now raged on for 6 weeks? Remember, trust in the Iranian side in particular is on an extreme low because the Americans bombed them when they were in the middle of negotiations that were going well towards the end of February. In this special broadcast, we'll be looking at all dimensions of what we can and should not expect from the ceasefire talks. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo Story. When the Iranian delegation touched down in Pakistan, their narrative war was in top form. These images that you see are of Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mr. Ghalibaf, on a plane, and the name of the delegation is named after the children who were killed in the US missile strike on Minab, a school in Minab in Iran. These images that you see are the photographs of all of the victims, along with the knapsacks that the children would have carried to school were they still alive today. It's one more example of how Iran has been telling its version of events, its story to the world so much more effectively than the Americans have, especially when you contrast it with Donald Trump's threats to wipe out an entire civilization. But beyond the words, the language, and the narrative war, what will happen in the actual war? The Iranian delegation was received, as you can see, by Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir. I can also see Pakistani Minister Ishaq Dar in those pictures. Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has described this moment as a make or break moment, and the world today is looking at what may come from these talks. JD Vance, the American vice president, before leaving for Pakistan, had only one thing to say to the Iranians: don't play us, otherwise these talks won't go well. But the hard question is this: is it Iran that has the trump card when both sides sit down for conversations in Islamabad today? And what can we realistically expect? Can we hope that this war will actually end, especially with Lebanon emerging as a key player in the middle of the mix? The Iranians made it clear that unless Lebanon was covered by a ceasefire agreement, there could be no agreement. And American media is reporting a rather tense conversation that took place between Donald Trump and Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. I want to welcome to the program senior journalist, a Middle East expert, James Dorsey. He spent years looking at this region. You've seen him on our show several times. James, it's great to have you back with us. When we were talking earlier, both when I was in the UAE and here in India, you were not very hopeful of an off-ramp. Does this moment surprise you? Do you dare to expect something durable, something meaningful from it? How do you look at it? And how do you look at the visual language of the Iranian arrival? Those images of the school kids who were killed in a double-tap US missile strike in Minab. The Americans thought it was a naval headquarters. It turned out to be a primary school. This is another illustration of how the Iranians, I would say, have been telling their story way better to the general audience of the globe than the Americans have. But in real terms, James, how do you look at this moment?
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Essentially, it's a very good sign that both delegations are in Islamabad, particularly the Iranian delegation, given that it had set preconditions for the talks. But having said that, I would be very cautious. First of all, we don't know whether those talks are going to start. if Iran sticks to its preconditions for talks. And Ghalibaf, the Iranian parliament speaker who leads the Iranian delegation, has set two conditions. One being an end to the fighting in a ceasefire in Lebanon, and the other one sanctions relief. The fundamental problem here, beyond the specifics of this, is that both parties, Iran and the United States, are going into these talks in the belief that the other party has been militarily defeated and therefore needs a ceasefire and is going to do what it takes to get a ceasefire. Now, both parties have presented maximalist positions. One of the real questions is how much leeway do the negotiators have, in this case, by U.S. Vice President JD Vance and Mohammed Barkha Khalibaf, the parliament speaker, how much leeway do they have in terms of deviating from whatever guidelines have been set down, on the one hand by US President Donald Trump, but on the other hand by the Iranian Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. And those, in both cases, those are fairly maximalist positions.
May I ask you to talk a little bit about the Iranian delegation? It's very interesting. The Iranian media, the Iranian meme creators, they are underlining, in fact, the high education of the delegation. Ghalibaf is a very interesting man. He's the Speaker of Parliament today in Iran. But he has a PhD degree. He has flown planes. He has been with the Air Force. He has been a mayor of Tehran. And similarly, the Iranians are really driving home the sort of difference in civilizational approach, if you will. There you can see old images of Ghalibaf in the cockpit, as it were. How do you see this sort of clash of cultures? It is literally a clash of cultures. I mean, on the other side, you have Vance, Witkoff, Jared Kushner. On this side, you have, these Iranian politicians, one of whom who's also been a military man, Ghalibaf. And do you think the Pakistanis will actually be in the room, or have they just been sort of messengers? That part is not clear.
Well, they've been first and foremost messengers, but let's face it, having both parties in Islamabad is a success. And I think one has to give the Pakistanis credit for that. And they put a lot of work and a lot of effort into it, as did others, but first and foremost the Pakistanis. I don't think that the issue is the degree of or the level of education on both sides. There are highly educated people among the Americans, and there are highly educated people among the Iranians. What I do think matters is, one, experience and knowledge. Sure, JD Vance has a military career. He's a veteran. The Iranians, certainly Ghalibaf, but also the Secretary General of the National Security Council, Solkhaba, are people with long-standing military experience in senior command positions. What I think is much more important is that much more important than education is the experience of these people on both sides of the fence, and also the history they were shaped in. The United States and its envoys were shaped in the history of being empire. The Iranians were shaped in a history that far predates the Islamic Republic, of a country that was a target of empire, whether it was the Russians or the Brits, and later the Americans. And that's something that I think, when you read what the Iranians have been consistently saying, even prior to this war, with regard, for example, to the right of to enrich uranium, that's what's being reflected. Now, what that doesn't mean is there is not room for compromise. There is room on certain points for compromise, and you've got to be somewhat creative whereby you recognize certain things, but nonetheless, for example, nuclear enrichment. Iran wants the right to enrich within the parameters of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to enrich on its soil from day one, but it wants the recognition of that right.
Yeah.
Whether or not it gets that, and whether or not the Americans have the flexibility to work around those kind of things, we'll have to see. That's where the talks broke down in February, when the United States and Israel attacked Iran. That's where those negotiations were, which is why the Iranians, the then mediators Oman, and third parties present like the Brits said we were near to an agreement.
So here's my question for you. Um, in February, reports suggest that Iran had agreed to zero stockpiles. And then the Americans went and bombed them anyway. Do you believe the Iran walking into the room today to meet with the Americans is a stronger Iran than the one in February? Do you believe that this Iran, although ravaged by strikes by the Americans and the Israelis, has discovered a twofold leverage that it has deployed? One is the Strait of Hormuz, and the second is its ability to hit at regions in the Gulf. Interestingly, the Indian Foreign Minister Jay Shankar is in the United Arab Emirates today. The UAE hasn't been very keen for a simple American retreat. They are worried about an emboldened Iran. Do you believe that Iran is more emboldened today and holds the advantage in these talks?
It certainly is more emboldened. I don't think it's also more angry and more vengeful, if you wish. And that's a dangerous combination. Is Iran stronger than it was prior to the beginning of the war? The answer is yes and no. It's up against two nuclear powers, two of the military's most of the world's most powerful militaries. It cannot win a conventional battle with the Americans and the Israelis, and it knows that. But it's been very good at asymmetric warfare, and therefore it's not a defeated party. And not being defeated in Iranian terms is victory, and that's the position in a sense that they're going into. The Strait of Hormuz is going to be a very tricky issue. It's tricky for both sides. Let's be clear about it. Iran fundamentally knows that it cannot declare full and complete control of the Strait of Hormuz legally because it shares those waters with Oman. So it needs to have an agreement with Iran. On the other hand, de facto, Iran just needs to threaten to have control. It doesn't take much. And breaking that control is something that the United States has not achieved in 6 weeks of war, and likely would not achieve in another 6 weeks of war, even though it can deplete significantly Iranian missile stockpiles, drone stockpiles, production facilities, and if it decides to do so, as it indicated, severely damage civilian infrastructure.
Could I turn your attention to a New York Times report? I'm not sure if we have it, but if we do, requesting our team to pull it up. This says that the Iranians have indicated that they're unable to find the mines that it planted in the Strait of Hormuz. They were allowing vessels to pass through two different channels. One was, of course, the ones that they were clearing, and then they were the international waters. And then we have this report saying that they can't locate the mines. I mean, what do you make of this?
Look, first of all, I'm not. I can't say this with any absolute certainty, but I'm not sure there are mines. Let's face
Yeah,
it.
this could just be a bluff being played in the negotiations.
For the longest period of time, uh, shipping was going through the Strait of Hormuz. The
Yeah.
threat of an Iranian intervention was always there, even though it was long considered as hypothetical. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't planted mines recently, but the argument that they wouldn't know where they are, I think, is a fairly thin argument.
Yeah. I want to welcome to this broadcast a veteran diplomat, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Good to see you, ma'am. We've been talking with James Dorsey about, of course, the Iranians having reached Islamabad and in quintessential manner that we've seen in the last 6 weeks, landing with a very strong visual statement, calling their delegation Minab 168 after the children who were killed in an American missile strike on the school in Minab, with these knapsacks that the kids would have carried had they been alive today. These were placed on the seats of the plane that carried uh, the delegation. Uh, are you hopeful? Are you unhopeful? I know we should remind our audience were the first, when I was still in the UAE, to say that you believed that the war would end soon, that Trump couldn't afford to prolong it. We're at this moment now. How do you see it, ma'am?
The war has ended temporarily, Barkha, just as I said, because the only way that President Trump could have destroyed a 5,000-year civilization was to use the nuclear weapons of the United States. There's no other way of doing it. And if he had done that, the depending on the wind direction, it would have also killed off the population of half the people of neighboring states of Iran, who are all allies of the United States. So for me, as a veteran diplomat, as you described me, it was clear that it was unthinkable to use a nuclear weapon. When they used it in Japan so many decades ago, they used it on a country that was thousands of kilometers away from white man's territory. So it was very safe to use it over there. It was not safe to use it here. As far as the negotiations are concerned, it is good that the United States has selected Vice President Vance, who had always been against this conflict for various reasons, and who is seen by the Iranians as a relatively moderate voice, maybe because of his background, maybe because of his family, the fact that he has an Indian wife, etc. All this makes a difference to the perception surrounding Vance, that he is supposed to be much more reasonable. As far as negotiations are concerned, if they have planted mines, which from day one I had said that it's possible that they were able to plant a few because they always told, for instance, friendly countries, so called friendly countries like India, etc., to make sure that our oil tankers go through the Straits of Hormuz, right hugging the Iranian part of the Straits of Hormuz, or hugging the Omanese part of the Straits of Hormuz, which gave one the impression that in the middle of the Straits of Hormuz there could be a couple of mines. But the West, the Americans, have wonderful technology. For that matter, even India has. For mine sweeping, these mines can be removed. If the Iranians cannot remove it, there are ways of tracking where the mines are and cleaning them up. Uh, Provided Iran is willing to allow these minesweepers to come and sweep the Straits of Hormuz clear of any mine, which could happen if there was a, a permanent ceasefire, an agreement to allow the Iranians back to a normal life, some money given for development, because one of the reasons why they are asking for money for Straits of Hormuz is that they desperately need liquidity to restore the huge losses that they have taken on their civilian structure, which actually, Barkha, frankly, is a war crime according to international law to take out civilian infrastructure. But it's a very bad example to the rest of the world because, according to the Law of the Sea Convention, these international choke points uh, they don't belong to anybody. They belong to the international community, and no country has the right to ask for money. So if we agree to this, even if it's shared three ways, because President Trump says he also wants his share, then what will happen in other choke points? And for that matter, what kind of example does it give? Let's say to India, we have the Indian Ocean. Huh? We have a lot of shipping on the Indian Ocean. There is a lot of shipping on South China Sea, but according to the law of the Sea Convention, and we are a signatory, we don't have the right to do that. So we should not make an exception in this particular case because it will cause huge difficulties with other choke points and will actually further damage the global economy. Those are my preliminary comments. Barkha.
Yeah. Uh, just to follow up to you and to James, I do tend to agree with James that I don't think we even have evidence necessarily that there are actual mines, or that if there are, the Iranians can't locate them. I think they're just going to drag this out longer because it is the main leverage that they have. My question to you is about China. It's a slightly tangential question, because American networks are reporting that the Chinese are already beginning the process of sending air defense systems to Iran. The world is not necessarily assuming that you're going to, they're preparing for both scenarios. You get a ceasefire, which is, even if it extends beyond 2 weeks, that's some incremental success. But we have this. We also have reports that during the war, China was using Pakistan to actually send uh, weaponry to Iran. These are not confirmed reports, but these are allegations that are coming from a former Trump advisor. So, how do you see the role of China? Then there's been talk of the Chinese being the guarantor of some kind. Trump is going to be meeting with Xi Jinping supposedly in a couple of weeks from now. How do you see China? Ambassador Mukherjee, I'll start with you and then the same question to James. Yeah.
Well, this entire conflict and the ones before it have shown that President Trump lacks strategic thinking. Because if China is supposed to be the greatest adversary of US, and if Pakistan is supposed to be a satellite state of China, then I would conclude that all the steps that he has taken has actually strengthened China as the economist, and you put the front page there, and I've read the entire economist, as the economist points out, the strategic errors that Trump has made on behalf of the US has weakened the US militarily, and the world sees US as a violator of international law. The world sees China as a very smart country sitting there and using its strategic ally, whom Trump depends upon and calls the field marshal his best friend. This so-called strategic ally of United States is actually the total ally of China. So therefore, having the talks in Islamabad, sending the US Vice President to Islamabad, having talks which are being controlled at the back by Xi Jinping, what kind of message does that send, Barkha, to close strategic partners of US like India? What message do we get out of it? We have a border which the Chinese want to do what they call salami slicing of our territory. We are supposed to be a very important strategic partner strategically here. And yet we see to our horror that the Pakistanis are being pumped up on both sides by Trump on one hand and by the Chinese on the other. What is this strategic thinking? Is this the way that Trump wants America to become great again by destroying all its traditional allies and friendships and making friends with sworn enemies who want to bring United States down? That's the way I see it.
Can I can
I
I
don't.
ask you a follow up? Can I ask you a follow up on that before James comes in? The Financial Times reported that the Americans actually nudged the Pakistanis or asked the Pakistanis to do this. The New York Times reported that Trump actually saw the draft that Shehbaz Sharif put out before he put it out, right? So we have both of those headlines there. You say that Pakistan is an ally of China, and this is true. It's not even an ally, it's a vassal state almost of China. Um, and you are personally miffed, if that's the word I can use, though diplomats are rarely miffed, they've seen much worse. You're personally disappointed in the Americans using Islamabad for this message carrying. Is that what you're saying? You're saying that it's pumping up Asim Munir, it's pumping up the Pakistani state. There are those who say, well, let Pakistan do it. If there's actually a peace deal, it's beneficial to all. Which way do you see it, ma'am?
I see it as the wrong capital to have been selected. These talks could have been held in Oman. They could have been held in a better place. Please don't forget, Barkha, that we are also a democracy. The people of India regard the selection of Islamabad by Trump as a clear indication that if ever India needs United States, they will not be there for us. He has greatly damaged ever since he became president for the second term the India-US strategic partnership on one hand. On the other hand, he has whipped up anti-American sentiment across this vast land of 1.4 billion people and a 5,000-year civilization. His threats to destroy a 5,000-year civilization did not go down well with the people of India. They thought, thank God we have nuclear weapons. Otherwise, tomorrow Trump can make a similar threat to us that he can destroy our civilization, that he knows we will defend it for all that we have with our nuclear arsenal. In the process, he has also damaged deterrence and he has encouraged wavering states to think seriously about going nuclear because that's the only way they can protect themselves against Trump and Trump's America. So, yes, I'm not miffed. I'm just t- speaking the plain, unvarnished truth, the way we see it here in India. We see these steps as undermining US traditional allies like India. We see these steps as undermining India's position in our neighborhood, undermining India's position vis a vis its traditional rivals and enemies, Pakistan, China, etc., undermining us in a manner which is intended to damage our reputation and to cause a furious domestic debate within India as to why did we not do it differently? Why did we not show more sympathy for Iran? Why did we take a balanced position? Why did we practice strategic autonomy? Where has it brought us? And finally, what does President Trump think about that anti Semitic rant of the Pakistanis on X, which was later deleted? You have a negotiation in a capital where the deal makers are anti Semitic, terribly anti Semitic. It was a horrible post. And Israel is very much part of the conflict. So, is does it indicate that President Trump is getting tired of Netanyahu and is going to dump him? Or does it indicate that, as usual, when he agreed, he never saw it through, he had no strategic vision, and he just decided, as he always does, on the spot, yes, we'll go to Islamabad. Yes, we'll do this. That's not the way deals are made, and that's not the way that deals remain. That's my perspective. I'm not miffed at all because I knew very well from day one that this Trump second term is going to be a disaster globally, but also for India. I could see it coming. Barkha.
Okay, those are very, very sharp comments. I want to just recap some of them. Even as news is breaking, this is Al Jazeera reporting that the US delegation has also touched down in Islamabad. Witkoff Kushner, of course, led by JD Vance. Or maybe they're coming in two groups because this is only Witkoff and Kushner, not yet Vance. So it could be that they're coming separately. So Witkoff and Kushner have arrived. But I want to just actually. Yes, I think I'm getting confirmation that Vance will come separately. So this is only Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. James, I want to actually come in on some of the points that Ambassador Mukherjee made. One of the things that she said, and I think much of the world is going to be thinking this now, unconnected to Pakistan. Thank God we have nuclear weapons. I think many countries around the world, I mean, it's kind of ironic if the purpose of this bombing was to make sure that Iran's nuclear program was decimated. I think Iran will be convinced more than ever before that for its own security, it needs a nuclear weapon. I think countries that don't have a nuclear weapon are going to be thinking the same, that this is the kind of mercurial world that we live in. Point one. Point two, to Ambassador Mukherjee's point on Pakistan, definitely, we all know Pakistan's proximity with China. Being asked by the Americans to, as per the Financial Times, to organize this messaging to and fro, being involved in these negotiations. Ambassador Mukherjee says that the Americans didn't think this through. It's a message. It's a message that will not be received well in India. I want you to comment on both of these things, but actually the central contradiction of Pakistan being so close to China and yet playing this role in tandem with the Americans. I mean, the New York Times said that the White House dictated the draft before Pakistan's prime minister released it.
Let me make 4 points in response to your questions and response to your discussion with my colleague. First of all, on mining. I stood in 1987 on the bridge of a US destroyer as one of the world's largest oil tankers hit an Iranian mine. And the lesson from that is that it's the warships rather than the oil tankers that are the most vulnerable. This was a 400-something ton, deadweight ton oil tanker, which was mildly damaged and on its own steam made its way to Dubai for repairs. There were no casualties. Had the destroyer hit the mine on which I was, there would have been severe damage and there would have been a lot of casualties. So I think we've got to be careful with that. And the other point to keep in mind with regard to the mines is that the United States has, over time, significantly reduced its mines detection capability, which is one reason why the Americans initially asked their allies to step in. With regard to the issue of mediation, both Oman and Qatar recused themselves from mediation because they were being targeted. There are two states that really were prime candidates for mediation. One was Pakistan, the other was Turkey. They both have similar assets. They both have geography in terms of being part of the Middle East and of bordering Iran. They both have close relations with the United States as well as China. And they both have close relations with Iran and the Arab states. Pakistan's position is a much more complicated position, and in some ways gives it a much greater stake in getting a resolution of the war, which is one, it's home to the world's largest Shiite minority, and it has a potential insurgency border between Pakistan and Iran in the Iranian and the Pakistani provinces of Balochistan. With regard to China, I think we've got to be careful not to overstate China's role. Let's keep in mind that the Pakistanis during the mediation process went to Beijing because they wanted China as a guarantor, and they came back empty-handed. They came back with a 5-point statement, which everybody has forgotten. Now, I think what's very clear is there is benefit for China in a lot of what is happening, the weakening of the US position. They have an important relationship with Iran. They're willing to support them to a certain point. They weren't willing to guarantee an agreement, certainly not in which would involve potentially a military guarantee. Sure, they're possibly sending air defenses to Iran. Those air defenses haven't been really proven in battle. So we'd have to see what they're worth. The final point I want to make is on nuclear. The danger of nuclear becoming a preferred deterrent started with Ukraine, not with the Middle East. In other words, when Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons, and the Americans essentially tailored their assistance to Ukraine to ensure that they wouldn't cross a red line, which would raise the specter of Putin following through on his threat. That was the return of nuclear deterrence. And we've seen that ever since.
I want to just play out what Donald Trump said about what he thinks would make these talks a good deal. I want to just play out that statement and then come back to you, Ambassador Mukherjee. Let's take a look.
What would a good deal look like for you?
No nuclear weapon, number one. I think it's already been regime change, but we never had that as a criteria. No nuclear weapon. That's 99% of it.
Strait of Hormuz as well?
Yeah, but that'll open up automatically. The answer is yes, but the strait will open up. If we just left, the strait's going to, otherwise they make no money. So the strait's going to open, but what we have is no nuclear weapon, but we'll open the strait anyway. Don't forget, we don't use the strait. Other countries use the strait. So we do have other countries coming up, and they'll help out, but we don't use it. It won't be easy. It won't be, I would say this, we will have that open fairly soon.
So, Ambassador Mukherjee, Trump's constantly shifting sort of goalposts in this war are now the stuff of, actually, they're the stuff of memes and jokes all around the world. He's now saying that the main aim of these talks is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. That is his aim. And when he's asked about Hormuz, he's like, oh, that'll happen automatically. Actually, it won't happen automatically. Iran has made it clear that it now wants to charge a fee for the passage of vessels. It's willing to jointly manage these waters with Oman, because the Gulf of Oman is right there. And India has been very focused on the free passage of vessels, because that directly concerns our fuel and oil needs. What do you think would constitute for the Iranians something that they would walk away from these talks saying we got what we asked for? And likewise for the Americans. Let's also remember something we haven't spoken about. Till last night, the Iranians kept saying, till you bring in Lebanon into these conversations, we are not coming. And there is, of course, now a direct dialogue that is going to take place between Israel and Lebanon. They also asked for the unfreezing of their assets in Qatar, which we're told has happened. When you hear Trump saying the singular thing we want now from these talks is no nuclear weapon, he's also effectively saying that his war has not achieved that. Otherwise, why would you need these talks? Because Iran still has the uranium.
Well, Barkha, when he went into the war, he said he wanted regime change. That has not happened. There is no regime change. There has been an assassination, contrary to international law, of Iran's leadership, but there has been no regime change. Had he not gone into Iran, there would definitely have been a regime change, because it was a very unpopular regime which was collapsing under its own weight. It should have been brought down by its own people, and that would have happened. By intervening in this manner, he has actually strengthened the regime and brought in hardliners into power who will have even stronger views with regards to women's dress, etc., than the earlier regime had. As far as a nuclear weapon is concerned, yes, first he said he has destroyed forever Iran's nuclear assets. Then there were all these stories circulating on social media about how they rescued the missing colonel. God bless him that he was rescued. But then there were so many rumors circulating that actually it was an attempt to take out Iran's enriched uranium, which did not succeed, etc. Without proof, one cannot say anything. But there was no doubt that this was circulating all the time. Now we have a situation where what President Trump has done without his vision, due to his lack of vision, is he has caused a huge problem for the rest of the world with regard to international choke points. If this deal agrees to Oman and Iran charging countries, and he says he doesn't care because the American assets don't go through there, but the assets of his allies go through there, the assets of his strategic partners go through there. He is saying he doesn't care. His, from what I could hear him, what you played out, he doesn't care because it's not American assets. But these are assets belonging to US's allies. When he has a problem, he goes to them. And then
That's
when
right.
he goes to them, they say no to him because of this kind of messaging that he does. Now, if this choke point becomes monetized, you will see, Barkha, that other choke points will also become monetized. which will further drive up the price of oil and gas and other products, and which will lead countries with vast oceans like India to rethink their position on this matter. Nothing stops
I,
us from speaking. Only thing is
I,
we will have to withdraw from the law of the Seas Convention to which we are an original signatory because it is violation of international law. If we are going to
I,
violate international law, that's not going to happen. We will have to leave unclosed and then do what we like.
I think that's an excellent point. And James, I'll give you the closing comment there for the show. That for the rest of the world, we didn't start this war. So it's all very well for Trump to say this is not our problem because our products don't come through here. But he has left this impact on the world. And, we have a statement from Oman's transport minister 2 days ago that the Sultanate has signed agreements guaranteeing that no fees will be imposed on ships crossing the Hormuz Strait. And Oman remains committed to free and safe navigation at the strategic choke point. So my sense is this is now for Iran. It's the one card they have. It's the last card they'd ever let go of. They're going to have to be sure that Americans won't bomb them again 6 months from now. I don't know who's going to give that guarantee because Trump is around for at least another 2.5 years, unless he gets impeached before that or loses the midterms. There are all those variables. So, James, just closing thought. I mean, if I were talking to both of you at the end of the day, what would you say has been a good day in terms of something that might, end the war beyond this 2-week period?
Basically, it's a good day that both are in the same capital. And we're going to have to see what happens. With regard to the Omani statement, there's no evidence that Iran has agreed to that. Certainly not in advance of going into the negotiation. It would be giving away basically a trump card. And why would it? I think we're going to have to wait and see clearly what happens in Islamabad today. And that will give us some sense of how realistic an option there is for ending the war.
All right, we leave it there. Ambassador Mukherjee, of course, has many strong thoughts that she's expressed on the choice of that capital. And James is saying, okay, but the fact that they're going to be across the table from each other in the same room is some reason for the world to hope. We leave it there. It's a day we'll follow closely. Hopefully, we'll have the chance to talk to both of you again when we have more information. For now, we let you go and get some other work done. James Dorsey, Ambassador Mukherjee, always a pleasure, always an opportunity to learn from both of you. And to our audience, keep watching The Mojo Story for continued coverage of the Iran war ceasefire talks. Thank you and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.